Welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Good. This is the second half of my conversation with Dr. Britt Andreatta, who is an internationally recognized thought leader and creates science-based solutions for today's challenges. She's also the CEO of Brain Aware Training and the former Chief Learning Officer of lynda.com, which is now LinkedIn Learning. During this part of my conversation, Britt is sharing some valuable insights, tips, and tools on how to navigate the journey of change for both employees and leaders. We also discuss ways to stay motivated throughout this process and how to remain connected with each other throughout the change journey. Enjoy. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. And before we get into those tips for the employees and for the leaders that are going through these change initiatives, just wanted to step back and just talk about a little bit about those 4 factors that influence any change outcome, because I think those are critical to know. They're disruption, whether you can get acclimated to the change quickly or not, individual choice, right? Do the employees choose the change, or is it going to be put on them? And then the desire for change. How much do employees want the change, or is it being placed upon them?
Yeah, human motivation for change comes down to those 2 axes really. Did you want the change, yes or no? Did you get to choose the change, yes or no? So it really gives us kind of 4 quadrants. And the first quadrant, think about if you applied for a job at a place you've always wanted to work and you get the job, right? Chose it, wanted it. Your energy is going to be really motivated. You're going to be running toward that. You're going to feel like you had a win. Where take my experience where I got a job at LinkedIn, but I wasn't planning for it. I wasn't ready for it. It was like, okay, I want it, but I didn't choose it. So I'm going to lean in, but I'm not running like as if I applied for a job there. Right. And then there's did not choose, do not want. And it's just human nature to dig in your heels and resist it. Just emotionally, no, don't make me do this. A lot of grumbling, a lot of frustration. And then we have this fourth weird category, which is I'm choosing it, but I don't want it. An example might be you take a demotion because it's going to set you up for a different career journey. I think most of the stuff around the pandemic, masking, working from home, that was how everyone felt about it. So what I like to do with leaders is have them map the changes, like literally get out a timeline and try to figure out, is this a long and steady trek? Is this a quick hike up a steep hill? But then dig in and add, how do you people feel about it? Because it's going to take more leadership to get resistors down a path than it is to get the marketing team who's so excited to rebrand the product that they're running toward it. It really gives you a good guide as to like what kind of leadership and support you need to bring to that change.
Let's move into those tips for the travelers, for those that have to actually, the employees. You have some great tips. You have 10 tips in your book, but love to kind of just unpack that first one is doing an inventory, right? Because many people don't do this, to try to consider first the change that's coming their way. Talk about those 4 factors that we just discussed. And then I love that second point that you mentioned is add at least 50% to your estimate, right?
Right. I mean, if any of you have ever gone through like like a kitchen remodel or anything at work, it's always longer and harder than you thought. So, I think kind of the first tip is like realize that your brain is naturally going to spin out on worry. So, you have to intentionally try to contain it a little bit. And one of the ways to do that is like, all right, let's map it out. Let's get a sheet of paper. When does it start? When does it end? How hard does it feel? What's involved? Kind of like wrap your head around it a little bit. And then usually here is when you realize you don't have some information. So you got to ask questions. You got to go find out more information. Maybe leaders thought it was readily accessible, but you can't find it. So it's a great thing to ask about and get more information. And then the key to kind of turning your attitude is to find some kind of benefit in going through the change, whether that's it aligns with your sense of purpose. You'll get a great new skill that you can put on your resume. You'll get to work with someone closely that you like working with. You got to find some positive nugget in there that works for you. The company already has its, right? It's already decided it's moving forward, but employees need to find their own sense of purpose and change. And that really makes a difference. And then of course, partnering with other people so you kind of go through it together. If you can gamify it, those are some tips that you can use to make it easier to get through it.
It's also important to train for the trek, as you throughout the book you liken this to the metaphor of climbing a mountain, and make sure you rest at the resting points. Ask for help if you need it, and in those cases in which you need to get off the mountain, you can't support it, unable to participate, then talk to your manager or HR professional.
I intentionally put in that book that tapping out is an option, right? Like we have leaves, we have the ability to say, "Hey, can I be assigned to a different project? This one I just can't do." Good managers will notice who on their team is in good shape and who's struggling, and maybe they share the workload in a different way, knowing on the next change initiative it'll swap out and even out in the end. But absolutely, I think one of the things is that employees don't always realize that they can be empowered to take care of themselves, and it's the whole reason why we have some of these practices, but sometimes managers don't remember or HR doesn't necessarily make them widely known. And so this is where you want to dig into what your options are.
Let's move now to the leaders toolkit, and they really are in three areas: navigational tools, motivational tools, and connection tools. And let's focus first on those navigational tools, the why and the how of the journey. We already talked about building the habits, and that's so critical for a leader to do. What I really wanted to kind of emphasize here is that a leader needs to be a steady presence as well, because every great leader will tell you that what it makes or what it takes to make the difference, but you have to continue down that path, be that reliable, steady presence for your employees over time so they feel more comfortable with the change.
Yeah, and for within our model, we label this group guides. They're typically managers who they didn't get to design the change, it's been kind of handed to them, but they usually have a group of employees they're taking through it. So for guides, they've got the navigation, motivation, connection tools. And absolutely, their job is going to be to help people make it through this change, right? So they got to know where they're going. And even if they're only a few steps ahead of their employees, it's really exuding that confidence, because if they're stressed out and confused, that's going to catch on with the employees. So, really being that steady presence, hey, we got this, we're going to be able to go through it, talking about it confidently, continuing to inform your employees with as much information as you have. Managers play a real vital role in the attitude that employees feel when they're going through that change. So definitely the navigation is making sure you know where you're going, and exuding that confidence that your employees can lean on.
Well, let's step back then for a second just to kind of identify those three roles that leaders play, because you're right. This is kind of going more in the guide part, but there's two other roles that leaders play. Perhaps you can let our listeners know kind of what they are and kind of their roles in this change process.
Yeah, and as you can tell already, the whole book is written around kind of the metaphor of mountain climbing or hiking, because that's kind of how change feels to people. So there's three types of leader roles. One, we are the senior leaders. I call them expedition designers, right? And they're the folks who decide that change is needed, and they oftentimes design the change, or at least the broad brushstrokes of the change. And then the next group is they hand it off to trailblazers. And trailblazers are the folks who set the route and enable the success of all the travelers to go on that change journey. So, for example, if you're going to have a big change in your software, the IT team would be the trailblazers. If you're going to roll out a reorganization, HR are going to be the trailblazers. So, this team actually runs the change. They're out on that trail 2 or 3 times, setting it up before everybody else goes out on it. So sometimes those teams can end up getting burned out because they're leading, they're trailblazing several changes. And let me just say that in small organizations, you can have people wearing multiple hats and they're literally changing hats. As you get into larger organizations, these roles are pretty different, like they're distinct from each other. And then the third type of leader role are guides. These are managers or supervisors who's leading their people through it for the change journey. So a typical example might be like the C-suite decides that they want to shift software packages. The trailblazers are going to be the IT team that really have to look into it, install it, get it ready. They might also ask the learning and development team to build some training with them. And then at some point, it's announced, but it's literally the guides or the managers who are going to have to be the ones to get their folks through it. And then, of course, the trailblazers may also have their own employees, so they may then shift hats and be guides as they take their own employees through the same change.
I love one of the points you make, that a great motivating factor is shift from goals to problem solving.
Absolutely. This was another part of the research that really surprised me, is that the brain, when we set goals, it becomes a checklist and you do it or you don't do it. But oftentimes it's not very motivating. Where if you shift to problem solving, saying, hey, in this phase, what we're solving for is A, and in the next phase, what we're solving for is B, it turns on this searching part of the brain that is now looking for the solution. And when it finds the solution, gets a huge serotonin and dopamine hit. Where if I'm just checking off a checkbox, I might get a little hit, but it's not the same. So really starting to think about problem solving and organizing your change journey into phases of problem solving can really and also enliven the people who have to go through the change. They oftentimes at the front line have much better ideas as to what will make something successful than the view from the top. So this particular strategy gets you a twofer. It gets you people more motivated, but it also probably gets you better input.
And another piece of the toolkit for the on the motivational side is what we talked about already. Recognize effort and progress, and this gets really into that growth versus fixed mindset. How you recognize effort instead of saying "great job," you are so smart. Say "great job." I can tell you put a lot of time and effort into this.
Yeah, I mean, Carol Dweck's research on the fixed and growth mindset is phenomenal. So if you have not read her book yet or dug into that, I encourage folks to. But it turns out that we teachers and adults kind of set the mindset for children based on how we talk to them. And if you're always complimenting an innate trait like you're so smart, you're going to groove unintentionally with all the best compliments and authentic compliments in the world. You can create fixed mindset people where if you focus instead on effort and progress and how much they worked at something, how much they practiced something, how much they made mistakes and learned from those mistakes, that's what creates a growth mindset. And what I love seeing, I now have a 17-year-old, but through her entire school time, Carol Dweck's research has really played out with how her teachers talk to her. And I've seen her embrace that. And we can do the same thing at work. Managers can really help employees develop a growth mindset with how you give people feedback and the things that you compliment.
And the most successful models seem to have two levels, like you state. First, they include small tokens that mark recognition or success, like stars or chips or verbal shout outs, electronic kudos. They should be given it abundantly but authentically. The second level includes these larger special prizes that are given to few who show exemplary performance. And perhaps you can go through that example of T-Mobile's Peak Achievement Award and how that's been demonstrated through this process.
Yeah, I mean, lots of companies use different methods for this. So one is, be be exuberant and generous with a lot of the small things, right? You can kind of have a cheers for peers or a kudo board, or there's lots of now software packages that you can roll out in HR for employee recognition. People can get points and then you can use the points to buy something in the online store. There's lots of cool things you can do. But then it can also lead to a big reward, such as a sales team getting a trip to Hawaii or the marketing team getting some big benefit when they achieve some company goal. But oftentimes what happens is we set these goals and they're not really acknowledged. People did all the work and then there's not really that effort. And what happens then is you build a culture of quiet quitting. Quiet quitting is not doing the really disengaging. It's about working your wage and only putting in the effort in which you're rewarded for. And so people have really kind of wised up to the fact that, well, if you're expecting big things, shouldn't we get to share in the benefit of it, right? Shouldn't there be some benefit to us? So I think T-Mobile did a great job of they had established this system of earning rewards, and then there was some big prizes for the teams that accomplished the big thing in the end.
Well, let's then move on to the third type of tool, and those are those connection tools. They're powerful because they help build rapport and collaboration between and among your travelers, and it all needs to start with empathy.
Absolutely. So connection tools are really about the fact that your group of people is going to be on this change journey. And at some point, it's going to get hard and you're going to need to be able to work well together. So it's really about building the connection between them. I always like to quote this African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So it's really about spending some time starting with empathy. Oftentimes this is good for the leader, the manager to start with, which is really realizing like, hey, people are going to have feelings, they're going to be frustrated, And if you can be non-judgmental and really hear what they're feeling, it's going to help you know how to provide the best support. But we can also teach people to have empathy for each other, right? Feelings are real. And especially as we go through that change curve of those early frustrated feelings, having someone be able to listen and help us move through it is what's going to get your folks on board. Another big tool you can use here is just empowering social connections, help people get to know each other, help people talk about their strengths that they can bring, have people celebrate together. This is where you can, again, kind of combine a couple things. And then probably the cornerstone here is psychological safety, right? Which is Amy Edmondson's research. We know that it is a cornerstone of what brings out the best in a team. Essentially, what it is people feel like they can make mistakes. And as long as they're learning and improving, they don't have to fear being rejected or punished, which is a pretty low bar. But I've gone into some organizations and there's no psychological safety. If you don't have it, people are not going to lean into change because change inevitably is going to create opportunities to fail, and we need to be able to learn and move forward.
And the last and perhaps most important tool in this toolkit is patience, right? Patience is crucial because leading a change journey can be hard work. Not only do you have your own experiences through the change initiative, but you're also responsible for the travelers and what they experience and what they feel as well.
Absolutely. Patience, I think, is critical. And part of that is self care. I think sometimes we need to make sure that leaders and managers are making sure they've got their downtime on the weekend, or if they need a little more support, getting a therapist or a coach so that they're taking care of themselves. But if they're running ragged, their patience is going to decrease, and then they're going to be snapping and not supportive to their folks. So we really want to lean in and give managers and leaders the opportunities to take care of themselves too.
Giving them lots of tools, but are there one or two practical tips that you can give leaders that are leading a change initiative?
Yeah. Well, for frontline leaders, I think it's a couple things. You're going to be in the position of receiving change that you did not design, and the people above you may or may not have been a good role model for how change should be led. So realize you're in this position of kind of getting that and then needing to repackage it so that you can be the steady presence. You can motivate your folks, you can connect with them. I've seen middle managers do a phenomenal job really creating a great culture around that. So I think part of it is just realizing, okay, I'm going to have to set time in my schedule to take this stuff in and then repackage it and communicate it in an effective way. I think that's really important. I think the other thing is to work with your team and say, okay, guys, we're going to go on this journey. Let's map it out. Let's figure it out together. How do we want to make this fun? How can we support each other? And so that you're really just guiding them through this process that you all approach as a team. Really, like if you went on a hike with a group of friends, like we're going to talk about who's bringing what, and do we want to have s'mores every night? Is that going to be, help us get through it? So I think thinking about it that way will give you kind of the natural inclination to have the conversations. Of course, in our training, we provide all kinds of tools and things that managers can use, but I think that's the spirit of it that will help you. And then in that, just making sure you take care of yourself, because if you're exhausted, you won't be that helpful. The other thing I would say is that look to your more experienced employees. This is where you can kind of delegate a few things to your more experienced or capable employees to kind of help take care of the rest of the team. It doesn't all have to be on your shoulders, but you want to do that intentionally as opposed to kind of who's doing what.
Wonderful. Great advice. Thank you again for being on the episode, Britt. So many great insights that you shared today. Remind our listeners how they can learn more about your work and connect with you.
Oh, well, great. I'm on LinkedIn. I love having folks connect with me on LinkedIn. So you'll find me there all the time. I'm also on Instagram. Both of those are under my name. And then my company is Brain Aware Training. So you can also go to the Brain Aware Training website. We're also on LinkedIn and Instagram. So those are the couple ways: Britt Andreatta or Brain Aware Training.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.